My Aunt Maria accused me of something I could have never imagined. She claimed I got her pregnant and demanded $100,000 in child support. My sister Emily, who had always been the golden child, and I were completely blindsided by her accusations, and we knew we had to take her to court to sort this out. I've been holding on to this for too long, and it feels like every year I try to convince myself to just let it go, move on, and pretend like it never happened. But I can't. The weight of it is still there, and it's time I get it off my chest. If anyone has any advice, or even if you just want to tell me to forget it and move on, I'd appreciate hearing it. I grew up in a typical suburban neighborhood where everything seemed perfect from the outside. My parents, Ava and John, had stable jobs, a nice house, and a seemingly picture perfect family. But behind the walls of that house, things were far from perfect, and honestly, it all started when my little sister Emily was born. Emily was the golden child from the very first moment she entered the world. Even before she took her first steps, it felt like my parents forgot I existed. I'm 3 years older than Emily, so I was old enough to remember what it was like before she came along, before my life turned into a constant game of comparison. Before Emily, I was the center of my parents' attention. My mom used to read me bedtime stories every night, and my dad would take me out to play catch in the backyard almost every weekend. I didn't realize at the time how much I treasured those moments until they were taken away so suddenly. When Emily was born, everything changed. I get it, babies need attention, but the way my parents treated her compared to me was like night and day. Emily could do no wrong in their eyes. At first, I thought maybe I was just being a jealous kid, but as we grew older, it became more obvious. Emily was naturally good at everything, straight A student, star athlete, and popular at school. She seemed to excel at everything she touched, while I was just average. My parents were obsessed with her achievements. They went to every one of her soccer games, celebrated her report cards, and hung up every piece of artwork she brought home on the fridge. Meanwhile, I was left to fade into the background. I wasn't a bad student, and I wasn't a troublemaker, but I wasn't Emily. I remember bringing home a B plus on a math test once, feeling proud because I'd been struggling in that class for weeks. My dad barely looked at it and simply said, "Next time, aim for an A." Meanwhile, Emily could walk through the door with some random participation trophy, and they'd act like she had won an Olympic gold medal. It felt like they couldn't see me anymore. They saw their perfect daughter, who could do no wrong, and I was nothing more than background noise in their lives. As we got older, things only got worse. Emily thrived in high school. She was top of her class, homecoming queen, and the captain of her soccer team. She was everything my parents ever wanted. I, on the other hand, was struggling not just academically, but emotionally as well. I tried reaching out to my parents once, desperate for attention and validation. I remember sitting down with my mom and telling her how hard things had been for me, how I couldn't concentrate in school and felt like I was falling apart. She barely glanced up from her phone and said, "You'll figure it out. You always do," and went back to texting. It was like a punch to the gut. I didn't even bother trying to talk to my dad. He was too busy planning Emily's future in sports stuff. That was the moment I realized I was on my own. If my parents didn't care about me, I decided I didn't need them. I focused on getting through school as best I could, made plans to leave as soon as I graduated, and applied to colleges far away. I didn't even tell my parents until I had already been accepted. I ended up getting into a school 5 hours away from home. They didn't seem to care. They were more focused on whether Emily would follow in my footsteps or stay local to pursue her soccer career. The day I left for college was bittersweet. I was excited to finally get away from them, but there was this lingering sadness, like a part of me had to accept that I would never be enough for them. My parents didn't even drive me to school. I packed my own bags, drove myself, and moved into my dorm on my own. No goodbyes, no tears, no "we're proud of you." Nothing. College was supposed to be my fresh start. I was determined to reinvent myself, to become someone who didn't care about my parents' approval. But the thing about childhood trauma is that it doesn't just disappear because you change your environment. I made friends, went to classes, and did everything I was supposed to, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still that kid my parents ignored. After my first year, I decided to stay in the city instead of going home for the summer. I got a job waiting tables at a diner and rented a cheap apartment with some friends. I didn't even bother telling my parents, and when they didn't call to ask why I wasn't coming home, I knew I had made the right choice. But things took a complicated turn when Emily called me one night, crying hysterically. I hadn't heard from her in months, which wasn't unusual. She had her life, and I had mine. But she told me that our parents had found out she'd been secretly dating one of her teammates, a girl. They lost their minds and kicked her out of the house. I was shocked. Emily had always been their perfect golden child. But now, they had cast her aside the moment she didn't fit into their ideal mold. She had nowhere else to go, so she drove to my apartment and begged me to let her stay. I didn't hesitate. Despite everything, she was still my sister, and she needed me. For the first time, I saw Emily not as the perfect child I had grown up resenting, but as a vulnerable teenager who had been carrying just as much pressure as I had. Maybe even more, duh. She stayed with me for a few weeks, and during that time, we grew closer than we had ever been. We talked about everything: our parents, the expectations they had placed on us, and the way they had pitted us against each other without us even realizing it. Emily wasn't the flawless person I had always seen her as. She had her struggles too. She admitted she had been miserable for years, trying to live up to their impossible standards. But just when we started rebuilding our relationship, things took a dark turn. One night, I came home from work and Emily was gone. She wasn't answering her phone, and I had no idea where she was. The next morning, I got a call from the police. They had found Emily in a park after what looked like a suicide attempt. She had taken a bunch of pills and left a note saying she couldn't bear the shame anymore. Emily survived, but it shook me to my core. All those years I had been jealous of her, thinking she had the perfect life, but she had been suffering just as much, if not more, than I had. I blamed myself for not seeing it sooner, for not being there for her when she needed me most. After she got out of the hospital, things changed. We had to start over again. We were both still healing, but we knew we couldn't go back to how things were. That's when I cut my parents out of my life for good. They didn't care about me, and they didn't care about Emily after she stopped being their perfect little girl. We were on our own. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, my Aunt Maria showed up out of nowhere and turned my world upside down with her ridiculous accusation that I had gotten her pregnant. She demanded $100,000 in child support, claiming that I was the father. It was like a nightmare, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was no truth to it. I hadn't seen Maria in years, and there was absolutely no way we had been involved in any way, let alone that I had fathered her child. I knew she was lying, but she was persistent. She even threatened to go public, saying she would ruin my reputation and my business if I didn't pay her. It was clear she was trying to extort me, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I lawyered up and decided to fight back. It was a long, drawn-out battle in court, and Maria's lies only made things worse. Eventually, we demanded a DNA test, and the results came back exactly as I expected. I wasn't the father. Maria had been lying the entire time. The court ruled in my favor, and Maria was ordered to pay damages for defamation and extortion. In the end, I won the battle, but the whole ordeal left me emotionally drained. My relationship with my family was already fragile, and this only made things worse. I'm still trying to rebuild, and it will take time for the dust to settle. But at least now, I can breathe again.